No fridge, no freezer, no takeout. So how did medieval people keep their food from rotting? Spoiler, they salted it, smoked it, buried it in snow, and even drowned it in wine. Some of their tricks were genius, others involved jellyfish-textured fish and 15,000 pickled eggs. Stick around, by the end of this video, you'll never look at your refrigerator the same way again. Welcome to Medieval Times Explained, where we dive deep into the bizarre brilliance of the past, starting with this essential question: how on earth did people keep food from going bad? Without refrigerators, vacuum sealers, or canned soup. Let's get this straight. Medieval winters were brutal. There was no takeout, no delivery, no calling up a tavern and saying, "Hey, I'll have the goose special." If your pantry ran empty, you starved. That's why preserving food wasn't optional. It was a matter of life and medieval death. Now, enter the medieval kitchen. Not the Pinterest perfect kind, but the smoky, greasy, wonderfully chaotic kind. The walls were blackened, the air thick with wood smoke and just enough panic to keep things exciting. And hanging from every beam: meat, herbs, cheese, garlic, onions, and more salt than a Roman pay stub. Forget minimalist design, this place was a cross between a food storage bunker and a witch's apothecary. Preservation wasn't just about planning, it was about survival. Because if your food rotted midwinter, there were no second chances, so they got creative. Really creative. Like, let's hang this fish from the ceiling and smoke it until it becomes immortal, kind of creative. And that's just the beginning. Because the ways medieval people kept their food edible will blow your 21st century mind. Stay with us, because what comes next is deliciously bizarre. Before Bitcoin, before gold, there was salt. In the medieval world, this stuff wasn't just seasoning. It was currency, power, and life insurance all rolled into one. Ever wonder why we call it a salary? Thank the Romans. They literally paid their soldiers in salt. Because without it, their armies would have smelled like death and eaten nothing but spoiled meat. Salt kept food edible, wounds clean, and armies alive. It wasn't a condiment, it was strategic infrastructure. Fast forward to the Middle Ages. And Venetian merchants figured it out. Don't mine gold. Control the salt. These guys built empires, literal fortunes, shipping salt to the rest of Europe. They were the salt tech billionaires of their time. And their startup pitch was simple: you want food? You need us. Now let's get salty. Literally. The core of medieval food preservation was salting. Here's how it worked: take your meat or fish. Rub in so much salt that it looked like a snow-covered hamlet in February. Some recipes called for up to 20% of the food's weight in salt. Why? Because salt sucked the moisture out, dehydrated the meat, and made it nearly immortal. They salted everything: beef became jerky, pork became ham, fish became stackable, even cabbage got in on the action. Hello, sauerkraut. But there was just one small problem. Salt was ridiculously expensive. We're talking 1 pound of salt equals an entire week's wages for a regular worker. In one French village, locals traded a whole flock of sheep just to get enough salt for the winter. Salt wasn't just a commodity, it was a matter of survival. And if you couldn't afford it, well, you were about to smell like regret and eat rotten duck. Salt was great, if you could afford it. But for most medieval households, preserving food meant turning the kitchen into a low-budget smokehouse. And no, they didn't have exhaust fans. Everyone smelled like bacon, all the time. Forget modern BBQs. Medieval smokehouses were the entire room. Smoke wasn't a side effect, it was the whole point. The idea? Hang your meat, your fish, maybe even your cheese up in the rafters or inside the chimney. And let the kitchen fire do the rest. And yes, they were picky about the wood. Oak for beef. Applewood for pork. Cherry for poultry. Because even in the 1300s, flavor was everything. One medieval German cookbook even included wood pairings. Long before wine and cheese pairings were cool. But smoke did more than make food tasty. It created a natural barrier against bacteria and bugs. It turned meat into medieval beef jerky. And gave it the survivability of a war-hardened knight. The really fancy kitchens. They had tiered smokehouses, think medieval food parking garages. Top floor, fish delicate, quick smoke middle, pork medium intensity bottom, beef full blast flavor inferno. The result? Smoky food that could survive a siege, a blizzard, or 5 weeks in a peasant's backpack. And it wasn't just meat. They smoked cheese, grains, and believe it or not, eggs. Smoked eggs. Because apparently, nothing was safe from the medieval flavor gods. Imagine explaining that to your chickens. Sorry girls. Your eggs are headed to the chimney. So the next time you enjoy smoky bacon or Gouda with that perfect campfire tang, just know, your medieval ancestors did it first. In a kitchen where everything, including the cook, smelled like smoked ham. Before refrigerators. Before coolers, freezers, or ice packs. Medieval folks relied on the original, inconvenient truth. Snow. Lots of it. Once the snow began to fall, servants turned into snow hunters. Hauling carts, buckets, and even wicker baskets to collect ice like treasure. Where did it all go? Down. Deep down. Into ice cellars, underground chambers with walls thick enough to outlast a siege. Think medieval bunkers, but filled with snow cones. Take Hampton Court Palace. It had an ice house so large it could store 75 tons of frozen magic. That's enough to chill wine for an entire medieval wedding. Or launch a very aggressive snowball fight. But here's the genius part. They didn't just dump ice in a pit and hope for the best. They packed it in layers of sawdust. Yes, wood shavings, creating a kind of organic medieval insulation system. This method kept ice frozen for up to 2 years. That's right, 2 medieval summers, no melting. And no one had to plug anything in. Of course, not everyone had an ice palace in their backyard. Most folks made do with stone cellars or natural caves, where the temperature stayed a cozy 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round. Here, they stored cheese, eggs, vegetables, even barrels of wine and beer. It wasn't glamorous. But it beat trying to freeze milk by yelling at it. And if you were rich enough to host a winter banquet, you didn't just serve cold drinks. You went all out, chilling desserts with snow for that added flair. Yes, medieval snow cones were a thing. Honey-flavored. Lemon-flavored. And hopefully, not the yellow kind. From underground bunkers to snowy buffets. Medieval cold storage wasn't just clever. It was cold-blooded brilliance. When salting was too expensive and ice too seasonal, medieval folks turned to the oldest preservation trick in the book. Drying the life out of everything. Meat? Dry it. Fruit? Dry it. Fish? Flatten it and dry it until it looks like medieval parchment. Even herbs. Upside-down botanical chandeliers. Their motto? If it doesn't run away, hang it up. Some regions even built drying towers. Tall, airy buildings with wooden slats to let wind in but keep birds out. One famous tower in France could dry 2,000 pounds of fruit at once. That's more prunes than a 14th century digestive system knew what to do with. But this wasn't just hang and hope. They had technique. Meat? Slice it so thin, it could double as a sermon bookmark. Why? Because half-dried beef equals full-blown medieval stomachache. Fish? Beat it flat until it was practically edible origami. Fun fact. Norwegian sailors once used dried fish as plates. Yes, literal fishware. Dry food wasn't just light, it was life-saving. A whole cow, once dried, could fit into something the size of a modern backpack. Perfect for armies on the move. Medieval armies had an official title for this noble duty. Keeper of the dry stores. Sure, he didn't get songs written about him. But when the salted pork ran out and the fresh game was gone, everyone loved the dried beef guy. So while you dehydrate mango in your kitchen for fun, just remember, in the Middle Ages, food drying was a matter of survival. And also, apparently, of creative dishware. When your food's about to rot, you've got two choices. Throw it out, or pickle it until it becomes a probiotic superfood. Medieval people chose option 2. Often. Loudly. And with a lot of vinegar. Step into any well-stocked medieval kitchen, and you'll find fermentation barrels tucked into every dark corner, gurgling away like potion experiments. In those barrels, sour cabbage, tangy pickles, fish that probably should have retired weeks ago. One 13th century German recipe tells cooks to put it in vinegar until it stops smelling like fish and starts smelling like regret. Honestly, that might be the most honest cooking advice in history. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about masking rot. It was medieval science. Fermentation made food last longer, taste stronger, and heal better. It prevented scurvy. It aided digestion. It gave people the gut health of a modern kombucha fan, minus the yoga. Some medieval monasteries took it to another level. One French abbey recorded over 15,000 pickled eggs a year. His hands smelled like vinegar. His soul smelled like despair. But his eggs? Perfectly preserved. And then, there were the Vikings. Because when pickling wasn't enough, they fermented fish and lye, yes, the caustic chemical, until it turned into jelly like lutefisk. To this day, lutefisk remains a Nordic delicacy. A gelatinous dare disguised as food. So yes, medieval pickling smelled weird, looked weird, and sometimes fizzed when it shouldn't. But it kept people alive, healthy, and occasionally burping up sauerkraut wisdom. Of all the medieval food hacks, one stood above the rest. Glistening, golden, and utterly delicious. We're talking about honey. The original sweet miracle. And possibly the only thing older than your grandma's jam shelf. How magical is honey? Well, archaeologists once opened an Egyptian tomb and found honey that was 3,000 years old. Still edible. Still sweet. Still safe. That's not food, that's sorcery. Medieval folks knew a good thing when they tasted it. They preserved fruits, meats, even whole birds, in honey. Yes, including peacocks. Because nothing says, I'm rich and slightly unhinged, like a candied royal bird. And the people behind this sticky empire? Beekeepers. They were treated like rock stars. Paid more than the cooks, and allowed to trespass if chasing bees. In a world without sugar, honey was the currency of taste, medicine, and luxury. Honey wasn't just for eating. It became medicine, too. Got a cut? Honey salve. Can't sleep. Honey and warm milk. Broken heart. Add more honey, or wine. And then there were the honey rooms. Castles had entire spaces just for honey-preserved food. The walls. So sticky, flies got trapped like medieval flypaper. Every spring, the staff scraped down the room with equal parts awe and annoyance. But how did they know if the honey was good enough? They dropped a chicken feather into it. If it floated, the honey was pure. If it sank, it was watered down. If the feather clucked, you had a witch problem. So next time you swirl honey in your tea, remember, in medieval times, it was a lifesaver, luxury, healer, and sometimes, a bird bath. In the medieval world, alcohol wasn't just for feasting and forgetfulness. It was also a surprisingly effective food preserver. And when salt ran out, the ice melted, and your dried beef bounced too hard, there was always wine. Cherries. Drop them in wine. Eggs. Submerge them in ale. leftover meat. Bathe it in spirits and hope for the best. They preserved everything from exotic fruit to entire geese. It wasn't always pretty. But it didn't rot. Some taverns served wine-soaked eggs as snacks. A sort of medieval pickled egg. With a buzz. One story tells of a man who ate 3 in a row on a bet. And ended up singing church hymns in perfect Latin. Which was strange, because he didn't speak Latin. Of course, the nobles took it a step further. They began layering fruits in different wines. Red, white, mead. To make their jars look like striped flags of fermented wealth. Medieval Instagram, but smellier. Eventually, someone figured out that stronger alcohol worked even better. Enter, distillation. And no, they didn't do it for fun. They did it for the pears. That's right, the birth of brandy may have been sparked by drunken fruit logic. So the next time you sip wine or crack open a beer, remember, in medieval times, booze didn't just preserve your spirits. It preserved your dinner, your dessert, and occasionally, your dignity. Let's take a moment to appreciate the glorious madness that kept medieval people alive through freezing winters, plagues, and pantry panic. They didn't have refrigerators, vacuum sealers, or expiration dates. But they had 7 ways to say, "Not today, rot." Salt so precious, it was worth its weight in sheep. And yes, people rubbed it onto meat like it owed them money. When in doubt, smoke it out. If your house smelled like bacon year-round, congratulations, you were doing it right. Servants played snowball fetch all winter so the elite could chill their goose pâté in style. If it didn't run away, it got hung up and shriveled. Some armies survived on meat strips that doubled as bookmarks. Fermented food, funky, fizzy, and somehow, medicinal. Trust the monk who pickled 15,000 eggs a year, probably not his choice. The immortal goo. If it could preserve a royal bird and trap flies on your pantry wall, it was probably doing something right. Alcohol preserved food, inspired poetry, and once made a man sing in fluent Latin by accident. So there you have it. 7 desperate, brilliant, weirdly effective ways to keep food from turning into plague bait. Next time you open your fridge to grab leftovers, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors, who had to preserve food using whatever they could smoke, brine, shrink, ferment, freeze, sweeten, or booze up. Just maybe skip the wine-preserved eggs.